Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew Waterhouse, Director of the Robert Mondavi Institute and Professor of Enology. Thank you for being with us tonight. This evening, we're presenting a Sips and Bites program on wine tasting with a focus on wine tannin. We'll work our way slowly up to this point, tasting a number of different wines. The Robert Mondavi Institute strives to provide the public with insights into the food and beverage innovations here at UC Davis. And tonight we're going to be tasting an experimental wine from a student project. Our presentations are meant to engage you, the public, with our speakers, so emphasize that your questions are welcome. Please use the Q&A tool to submit your questions, and our guests will answer as many as possible at the end of the evening. We'll start with a few introductions in a couple of minutes, but I need to mention that Professor Heyman was not feeling well today, so she'll not be here this evening. Despite that loss, I'm sure you'll be able to enjoy the program and learn much about tasting wine. Now, for those of you who purchased the tasting kit, we'll be tasting the wines in reverse as shown on the slides earlier. But I would be remiss if I didn't start by thanking Evan and the crew at Full Circle Wine Solutions for their diligence in checking the wines and preparing the kits that you have. Keep in mind that at least one of these wines has been prepared as part of an experiment, not a commercial wine. In fact, I have to admit that we dug that wine up out of the lab where it had been sitting for a couple of years. So it will show some classic defects, such as oxidation and excessive astringency. This is normal and expected, and not the result of faulty bottling. Again, thanks to Full Circle for helping us get these wines in your hands. We all learned from this attempt to present experimental wines to the public. And before we get into their introductions, I want to thank Dwayne Cellars, Navarro Vineyards, and Hobo Wine for their assistance in supplying the wines for the tasting tonight. So I want to start by introducing Madeline. I know most of you already know her, but I did want to mention that I first met Madeline a few years ago when I invited her to come to Davis and give a talk to the students. And I looked at her stuff on the web and I thought, that's pretty interesting. She's doing a pretty good job. And then I tell the students, well, Madeline's coming. And they go, really? Madeline Puckette is coming to Davis? We get to talk to her? Woohoo! 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 Then I understood who Madeline was. Now, James came here as a grad student, and he came here to work on some research, as most grad students do. And James came here from Fresno State, and I thought, oh, he probably knows something about wine. And then I started talking to him about, what project are you going to work on? He says, oh, I have a project already. I said, oh, you have a project already? Well, how are we going to support that project? He said, oh, I have the money already. Whoa. And I'm like, what? You have the money? So this is a first-year grad student who shows up to start his project, and he has the funding.
You have funding
already. This is the only student who ever came with their own funding. It was totally amazing. So we have two very exceptional people here tonight as part of our tasting.
And, a little introduction for you, I think, is in order. I was on the internet. I met you long before I met you because I was tooling around the internet trying to find answers to wine questions. And all of the questions came down to what the heck is in wine? And there was one website that I found online that was actually with answers and not just some little words on a page.
The Waterhouse Labs.
And it was the Waterhouse Labs website. And it helped me enormously, and it was free. And that's rare in the world of wine. Every piece of information is locked and guarded behind a key. And so that was how I met you. And then I harassed you on email. How about you? How did you find out about it?
I met Andy in 2016 at the ASCB conference in Monterey, and I was kind of begging him to come to UC Davis, but once I told him that I had money and I wanted to do a research project, I didn't really have to beg too hard anymore. That's how we met, and ever since then, him and Jim Kennedy have been great mentors to me, teaching me, giving me direction, but also giving me enough breathing room to, do what I wanted to do as far as tannin is concerned, and do my own research projects.
Yeah, if there's any grad student who wanted to focus on tannin, actually I have two. One was Jim Kennedy, and then James Campbell.
Both of you have been my boss.
Okay, so today we're doing a little bit of a fun thing together, and I think I want to get this PowerPoint presentation charged up, and so you guys can follow along with a little bit of visual. We're calling this the building blocks of wine, but it's really a tasting, which is the fun part, and we can almost get started right away. But I think what the goal of this tasting is really to understand what wine is, not just beyond what we smell and taste, but what's actually going on beyond what we smell and taste. Drink wine for science, would be what I always say. And a friendly reminder, we've changed the order. And please note, wine number 1 is actually wine number 5. And what I can do to get us started is walk us through wine number 5 and with getting the tasting started. So if you're ready and you've got everything set and poured and ready to go, this would be a great time to get your pens out and your note paper if you want to take some notes on this wine, because we're going to taste it together. And if you haven't peeled away the secret answers on these bottles, try to taste it blind. And because with wine number 5, we're going to throw up a poll while I'm tasting it, and you can guess what grape variety it is. And if you get it right, you will get an imaginary gold star from all of us up here. Okay, so let's grab wine number 1, which is actually wine number 5, and we're going to look at the color. Then we're going to sniff it and call out some flavors, and then we're going to taste it. And then I'm going to ask Andy a bunch of questions, because I've got a few. All right, so taking a look at this wine, wow, look at that color. This looks to be almost a medium gold color. Wouldn't you say this is a medium gold? It's a gold.
Not too light. It's nice.
It's got
some color to it. Yeah,
Golden straw color.
For sure. Wow. Okay. So there's color. That was fast. That's very easy to do, color section. Although you might disagree wholeheartedly.
We'll get there.
On the nose, my goal with a wine is usually to get 5 flavors at the maximum. Sometimes I can't even get 5, but so do what you can to call out some flavors. And I'll give you a minute to get started. What do you smell in this wine? Can you throw up our poll for wine number 5? What do you think this wine is? Starting with the nose. All right, on the nose, I get white peach. It's a little bit citrusy, almost like sweet Meyer lemon. And you called this out earlier, but orange zest, and I totally agree. Maybe it put it in my head.
With honey, for sure.
Yeah.
Honey as well.
A little bit of lime, and then, okay, I know what the smell was as a child, but Barbie doll hair. Does anybody get Barbie doll hair on this wine? It's such a wonderful smell.
Not acquainted with that smell.
That is too bad. It is a good memory. All right, so let's give it, so now that we've written down some flavors, I hope everybody wrote down their flavors, and maybe we're getting some answers coming in. I see some people guessing already. This is very exciting. Let's give it a taste. I feel like I'm the loudest wine taster. Nope, these guys are doing pretty good. Really swish it around, get on your palate, put it all over the place, because you're really looking for a couple of things. You want to identify the texture on your palate, if it is sweet or if it's dry, how it feels. Does it tingle? Does it have a long finish? How long does the taste of this wine last? And so
it looks like we have mostly Chenin Blanc with some Sauvignon Blanc. I think we can close the poll now.
Oh, we got some good answers. All right. Well, let's hold on one more. Okay.
Last call.
Last call to put your vote in on the poll. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, polls closed. We had the highest results for Chenin Blanc.
Chenin Blanc.
And I will say, your audience, you are absolutely correct. Good job. Gold stars all around, even those who voted for Chardonnay. Because it honestly, this was a really tough wine, so I can't believe everyone actually nailed it. So this brings me to my slew of questions that I have for you about this wine. Why the heck do we smell peaches in something that's made with grapes?
Well, it's one of those mysteries of fermentation. So what happens is the grapes have some what we call flavor precursors. In other words, they're things that don't have a taste to them, but during the fermentation process, there's this magical transformation, and the yeast take those things and produce new substances. So some of the things that smell fruity and floral, fruity in particular, are esters. There's a bunch of esters that are in wine, and if you've ever had Beaujolais Nouveau, it's intensely estery, and that's because it's very, very new, recently fermented wine. But the peach comes from what's called an isoprenoid, damascenone, and that we have that's found in most wines, and in this wine apparently a little bit more than normal. So it gives it and this definitely comes from the grape. So the grape, again, has a precursor, doesn't have damascenone. The yeast do a little magic to it and turn it into damascenone. By the way, that substance is very popular.
Damascenone is pronounced damascenone. I've been calling it damascenone the whole time, or damascenone. Thank you for saying it correctly for me. So I don't sound, well, I just said it in front of you the wrong way, so I guess I still do sound a little bit silly. So thank you. So these are some of the smells we get in white wines.
Right.
Now, when we're smelling this wine, I'm smelling a bunch of different smells, including the Barbie doll hair. Is this complex? Like, is this aroma science complex? Can we actually go in and scientifically pick out all these flavors just based on the chemistry of the wine?
Well, we can get close. We can say that in the case of the Barbie doll hair, which I didn't smell, but you did, that's fine. There's probably a very specific substance that produces that aroma, probably a thiol of some sort. But a lot of the things we smell are combinations of those aromas, or combinations of those chemicals which produce a smell or an impression of a smell. And we can't, we're still trying to figure that out. We can't dissect it completely. So we can't take like a list of chemicals and say it's going to smell like that, because we can't predict that. We can say, well, if we have a lot of, say, a particular ester, isobutyl acetate, it will smell like banana. But if you have a little bit of that and a little bit of another ester and a little damascenone, then it's a hard call. We can't say what it's going to smell like.
Okay, so wine aroma science is complex.
And we have a ways to go.
We have a ways to go.
We have a ways to go.
We got a ways to go to learn.
Right.
So speaking of a ways to go, let's take we'll mention I might come back to this slide if y'all want to take another look at it while we talk about the next wine. This was the wine that we just smelt and tasted, but I want to get us going to the next wine because there's more to taste and more to learn, and that was fun. So grab your next wine, which is wine number 6. Which is also wine number 2. It's wine number 6. So we're going to take a look at the color, take a look at this wine, maybe over a white sheet of paper if you can. And what I like to do is I hold my hand underneath it to see if I can see through it at all. And, usually have about 3 ounces in the glass to get a good, guess on this. And I can sort of see through it, but not terribly well. And this looks to be a ruby. Doesn't this look ruby colored to you? It looks like ruby, like a medium ruby color. If I was going to guess. It's not super. Is it purpley? I don't know that it is purpley.
Andy, is it purpley?
Is it purpley? What do you think?
No, I don't see any blue there. I see red.
Yeah, red.
Yeah, I would say brick red.
All right, so let's call this medium ruby, and we're done with color. So let's give it a sniff. On the nose. All right, this is where we can throw up the poll. Can you guess wine number 6? All right, on the nose. Wow. Smells different than when we smelled it in those other glasses earlier. I get black currant.
Black currant kisses.
Big time.
Sure. Absolutely.
A little bit of dark chocolate or dark cocoa. Like almost like cocoa powder.
And earlier, and a little bit still, I get like some preserves and blackberry. Not as much as I did earlier, but
Yeah, like blackberry preserves is a good call. I get this whiff of almost like you just opened black pepper, like your bag of black peppers, you're going to refill your peppercorn grinder. Like they haven't been ground yet. They're just still in the pepper form.
just fresh peppercorn.
Yeah, fresh peppercorn.
Hmm.
And it almost smells like a little bit like a touch. There's a sweetness.
Some spice, maybe from like oak derived aromas rather than grape derived. Just a little bit.
Yeah, maybe brown sugar, something like that. All right, we got some flavors down. I wonder what y'all wrote down. Let's give it a taste. Whoa. Wow. Body. Bold. Full-bodied wine.
Yes. No
Dry.
kidding.
Still fruity, but that there's really a lot going on the palate. Good lordy. And it's got a pretty long finish. Like I'm talking, and it's still going.
Yeah, definitely has a lot of fruit on the palate, long finish, and you're starting to feel some of the astringency that you didn't feel in the white wine.
Yeah.
In comparison, so you're starting to kind of feel the wine a little bit differently instead of the acid driven.
Yeah.
You're starting to get some of the tannin for sure.
For sure. Okay, so let's talk about these traits of wine, the taste traits of wine, if we will, but not before we finish this poll. Throw in your last guesses, what you think it is. I'm going to end the poll in 5 seconds. 5 counts. That's 5, 4, 3, 2. It's moving like crazy. 1. All right, last end. We're done. Oh my goodness, it was close between Petit Syrah and Cabernet, and those who guessed Cabernet are totally right. It is a Cabernet Sauvignon. Good guess. Wow, it led the whole way, and wow, it was close though.
But this wine really had,
Yeah.
and this wine definitely had some taste attributes.
We put Petit Syrah to throw you off because we were trying to trick you all. So if you guessed Petit Syrah, give yourself a pat on the back for guessing that because it really had a Petit Syrah sort of quality to it. So we're going to move forward in this slideshow, or actually move back. Back and forward. Okay, so red wines,
right?
Aromas.
Right.
I was calling out all these red berry flavors. Am I being influenced by the color of the wine and smelling those flavors? Where do we get these berry notes in wine?
The berry notes are actually esters as well.
Oh, really?
But they're specific esters which are higher in these wines. So these are called ethyl esters, and they have very distinct berry-like characteristics. But I'd have to say that when we have a red wine like this, there's also oak characters, which you were calling out.
Yeah.
Sweet notes, vanilla-like, brown sugar. These are pretty much all coming from the oak. So when the wine is aged in oak barrel, we get flavors out of that. In fact, winemakers use oak barrels not as a container, but as a way to flavor the wine, and it's definitely there. And the other thing you mentioned was the pepper character.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. That's from a substance called rotundone, which was discovered just a few years ago, in fact, in red wine. It wasn't even known in black pepper. It is in black pepper, but it was the wine chemist who found it and described that the pepper character is from rotundone.
Wow, I did not know that.
And now, of course, people have been analyzing a bunch of wines, and it's in more than just Cabernet. It's a lot in Gruner Veltliner. And other varieties, I think there's Syrah, it's pretty high. Anything with a distinct pepper character has rotundone. So that's kind of cool. It's recently discovered.
Wow.
So you can see there's lots of things going on in this wine. It's not a simple
not at all. And
flavor.
in the last wine, we got some flavors, but it was citrus and this type of citrus and that type of citrus and this type of citrus, but it was all kind of in the citrus family. And I started to think, we're calling out flavors in here which are way across the map.
Right.
How many aroma compounds can you find in wine?
Oh my God.
And does it vary?
It varies a lot. I would say that the more popular varieties like Cabernet and Pinot, as far as reds go, definitely have more complex aroma profiles than others. For instance, what's the Gewürztraminer is dominated by one particular terpene.
Really?
Yeah. Let's see, was it rose?
Cis-rose oxide, that one?
Cis-rose oxide. It's like a one-note orchestra, whereas Cabernet and Pinot Noir have many things going on. I think that's one of the reasons why Cabernet is different from place to place. And as it ages, it changes as well.
Wow, wow. So speaking of aromas aging and changing, what happens when that is happening? Why do the aromas change over time? And maybe I understand it's complex,
Yes.
but can you pick out is there an example in there for us somewhere?
Well, I can describe a couple of general processes. So one is that some of the esters break down. We use the term hydrolyze, so those are lost. So the ones that have that banana character, they're completely gone after a couple of years.
Really?
Yeah.
So if you age your Beaujolais Nouveau, it's not going to smell like banana after a certain amount of time?
It won't taste like much at all.
Deep burn. Okay.
That's why you want to drink that quick.
Quick and, okay. Take the banana, it's good.
Don't age the Beaujolais Nouveau.
Okay.
But some of the esters are very persistent, and those red fruit characters are very persistent. So they don't break down. There's various reasons for that. We go over this in the wine chemistry class that I teach. And then there's other things that happen. The terpenes tend to be lost.
Well, now, bring us back up to, now, what's a terpene? Can you give me an example?
So terpene, one notable one would be geraniol.
Okay.
Which has as you might guess, a sort of a floral character.
Maybe smells like geraniums?
Just maybe.
Okay, good guess.
Chemists are not that creative. We make up names based on where things come from.
I'm okay with that, actually. That makes it easier.
Yeah. So those things, actually, those usually go up for a few years, and then they start going down. And so that fresh, fruity, floral character tends to go up for a few years and then go down. So even in a wine like a Riesling, you see a sort of a blossoming of the wine in terms of freshness, and then you start losing that. Now you get other characters as time goes on.
Is there any aroma compounds that increase over time?
Yeah. Some of them aren't the best or the most favored. So you get some sulfur-containing compounds that tend to accumulate, especially in long aging. And that's one of the reasons we decant a wine, is we actually want to get rid of those. So you might get a little sort of a funky, hydrogen sulfide and other thiols accumulate. You might get a little bit of a rotten egg aroma.
Okay.
In a 10 or 20-year-old bottle of red. But if you open it up and decant it, the air will react with those things, break them down, and get rid of it. And I've seen magical transformations where you take an aged red wine and you open it up and you're going to go, do we want to pour this or not? Decant it, and about a half hour later or an hour later, you go, whoa.
Awesome.
Nice wine.
Okay, so there's hope for us if we're trying to sell our wine.
Yeah. So those things, and actually a friend of mine at Cornell is working on trying to figure out, can we prevent the formation of those smelly players as the wine ages. But that's research going on right now.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah,
Thanks for letting us know.
Trying to figure out where they come from.
Where they come from.
Yeah.
How they are derived. So then something else happened in this wine, which makes me want to talk to the texture guy over here.
Oh, yeah.
And that was all the texture that we were getting on the palate. It was really mouth-filling. And we're going to skip ahead. We're going to talk about flavors and the traits in the taste of wine, but since it's so present here, one of the things I noticed was it was that astringency on the palate. What is actually happening? What is that?
Yeah, so in comparison to the white wine, the Chenin Blanc, when you're talking about red wines, generally they're fermented on the skins, so you have different compounds in them that are not just aromatic compounds like Andy was talking about. These are we call them tannin compounds, and what they do is they can precipitate your saliva, and because of that we have a feeling of dryness on our palate. And these are common across the plant kingdom. We see them in let's say coffee, tea, chocolate. There's a lot of things that sometimes we perceive it as a little bit bitter, but also just drying on our palate.
Okay, so that drying sensation I get on my palate is tannin.
Yes.
Then I have a question where I taste a wine, and not only does it have a drying sensation, but it also has bitterness on the finish. Is that coming from the same thing?
I think we talked to Andy about this a little bit earlier, but there's a lot of different compounds that can cause bitterness, but realistically, tannin is the loss of lubrication from your saliva precipitating versus actual compounds that you can taste, because bitterness is a taste. Let me think of compounds that are really bitter. Some of the spirits that we were talking about earlier, Negronis or Campari. It's another one, Andy. It's another bitter. Amaro. Yeah.
Well, coffee has
some bitterness. Yeah. Caffeine is absolutely bitter. Yeah. So you would taste these and it would taste bitter, but it's not necessarily drying your mouth out like tannin will.
Okay. So when you taste a wine and you taste bitterness, and you taste a wine and you taste astringency, those we can separate in our brain as two different things potentially.
One is a feeling, and one is an actual taste sensation. Yes.
So the tannin in this wine that we're tasting, I know that it's coming from the grape, but it can also come from other sources with the wine. Isn't that right?
There's multiple types of tannin. When I'm talking about tannin, because of my research, I'm really talking about grape-derived tannin. But there's types of tannin that are coming from oak compounds as well. If you're aging a white wine or a red wine in oak, you're going to get some of the hydrolyzable tannins coming out into the wine as well. So based on the stuff I've read over the last couple, 7 years with Andy and Jim, hydrolyzable tannins have less. They still have some of the astringency, but they have less than condensed tannin, definitely.
Okay, so two types of tannin. We've got the hydrolyzable tannin and the condensed tannin.
Yes.
And so the condensed tannin is the really astringent one. Is that right?
Yeah. Condensed tannin can be quite astringent.
Okay.
If you've ever had a unripe persimmon, that is condensed tannin.
I've definitely been like, it's ripe enough, I'm going to eat it anyway, and that was a terrible mistake.
That is a standard for teaching students the difference between astringency and bitterness, probably. Yeah. Actually,
that's funny because I've always said put a wet tea bag on your tongue, but when you put a wet tea bag on your tongue, it's actually quite bitter too. Yeah. So you don't actually get that. You get the astringency, but you also get the bitterness, so you could potentially put those two together. But I like the
unripe persimmon, removing all of the saliva in your mouth is a feeling that you won't forget anytime soon.
Awesome. Okay, right. So we will do the reveal on the next one, but we're gonna go ahead. I want to. This was the Chenin Blanc, and that was the Cabernet Sauvignon. These were from Wade Cellars. Those little QR codes. If you're watching this on a TV or some kind of a screen where you still have your phone accessible, you can look up the details on these wines. And that's what that's for.
Yeah, and we want to thank Dwayne Wade for providing those. Oh, there he is. How about that?
Thank you so much. He's a little cheers to that guy because he's sent us these wines so we could taste them and talk about science. So on to the next one. This is going to be tasting group 2, which is actually wines 3 and 4. So if you will grab your wine number 3, that's the first one we're going to taste. And I think we should talk about the stuffs and wine. So Questions all around. Let's first give this wine a look. Take a look at the color of this wine. And this is perhaps the most telltale clue that we have in this wine here. That is a very unique color. It almost looks... It's super pale, but isn't it almost a little coppery to you?
You hold it up like that, but there's a brown background over there.
Oh, shoot. It's very pale. No, but it is. It's
when I hold it up with a white background, it's quite pale to me.
It is really pale.
But when I look at it across the table, I see the tone you're talking about.
It's just like, it could be a pale straw. I could call this pale straw, and that would be an acceptable.
Pale straw coppery?
Pale straw coppery. Pale straw plus a little whiff of copper.
All right, I'll go with that. All
right, that's my color. You guys are okay with that? You can bust my balls, absolutely.
I'm going with pale straw coppery.
Okay. Gosh, are we? That's the technical term. All right. So, on the nose. Wow. It's very singular in the flavors. I wasn't able to pick out that many, and so if you can pick out more than me, I'm very impressed. I definitely get mango on the nose. And can you throw up the poll for wine number 3? What do you think this is? I get a little bit of strawberry.
Yeah, it looks like I got white flower notes, like a little bit of that, and also I wrote down some citrus characters, like a lemon lime character, just a little bit though, mixed with the other characters that you're talking about for sure.
But I really get mango.
Yeah.
Like this is a mango party in my nose. All right, so those are the sniffy sniffs. Let's give this guy a taste. Ooh. You got stuff going on the palate. A really big explosion of flavor. It's very fruity. Mm-hmm. It's almost got this like orange. It's almost like biting into an orange or orange strawberry.
It's got nice acid. Absolutely.
Good acids, lemony finish. So what is going on in this wine? Okay, before we get into this wine, we've got a quiz for you, and we've got some results for you. And this is 5 seconds. We're going to end the poll. So this is your chance to vote. What do you think it is? Going in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're done. Oh, for those of you who guessed Pinot Gris, you were very close.
Very close.
Very close.
Very close. And we threw that in as a ringer because we're jerks. In fact, the variety that this is potential. Is a mutation?
No. This is Pinot Noir.
Oh, but this is Pinot Noir. But Pinot, the variety that is Pinot, Pinot Gris is the same DNA structure as Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris and Pinot Noir, and they share the same DNA and
mutations on that produce the anthocyanins or the color compound.
Right. So if you guessed Pinot Gris, you're gosh darn close, but you're still wrong. So, all right, let's move on to tasting wine and what we're actually tasting in wine. And I'll throw us up to the next slide here. Am I just not clicking it very well? I must be clicking it bad. Try again? No? Yeah. Hit the next slide. Yeah, all right.
Perfect.
Boom. So we both called out acidity. What are the primary acids that we get in wine? I'm going to ask you that question, and we'll talk a little bit more about texture too.
Well, there's 3 or 4 acids that are present in wine. A couple come from the fruit, so tartaric and malic. There could be some other acids that come from fermentation, like lactic or acetic. There's always a little bit of that. If we have a lot of that, that's not good. And I remember I took some of these acids to my son's grade school and made solutions and had them taste it. And I said, "You're tasting acid," and they're like, "Oh no!" But we have acid in so many foods, and it's critical to the taste of wine. That freshness and that acidity, that sourness, is a hallmark of wine. If we don't have it, it's not wine.
So I've seen acidity. Now, there's essentially two things that you're looking at with acidity, and I'm always getting very confused about it. There's the acid level,
Right.
and then there's the pH.
Right.
What's going on with that? How could you?
I guess one way to think of this is quantity versus intensity. And it's not exactly true, but it's the best way to distinguish the two.
Okay.
So the quantity has to do with what's called titratable acidity, which is largely what influences the sensation in the mouth,
Okay.
the amount of acid. Because the more acid you put in your mouth, the more it adjusts, it actually changes the pH in your mouth. The pH is like the intensity of the acidity in the solution, and winemakers pay close attention because that determines how stable the wine is. So if the pH goes a little bit too high, then lots of funky things can grow in the wine and make funny smells. If you keep the pH low, which by the way numerically is around 3.2 or so, then the wine is pretty stable and these funky things won't grow in the wine. And that's one of the tricks natural winemakers use to keep their wine clean, right? And don't get these sort of funky barnyardy aromas by keeping the pH low.
So can I have a wine with a titratable acidity? And I know there's a number scale. It's like 9 grams per liter, 8 grams or 5 grams or 4 grams. Can you have a wine with lower number, like 4 grams per liter, but still have that high pH or that super low pH? So be acidic?
Yes, you can. I mean, it's usually they sort of track each other.
Okay.
But not always. And actually James is sort of smirking because that's one of the challenges in winemaking for some winemakers is they get wines which have very high in one way and low in the other, and they're like, oh my God, how do I fix this? So it's a challenge in winemakers sometimes to have these things out of sync.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
If you do there's some practices in the vineyard that you can do that can really make a winemaker's job really difficult. If you spray potassium at the wrong time, it'll kind of buffer the system and you'll have a high pH and it can have a high TA too, and it's a problem.
Yeah, potassium. Now, remind us what potassium does in a wine?
Well, potassium basically, if you sprayed it at the wrong time, you can increase the pH inside of the berry, and then it'll cause problems on the winemaking side, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Awesome. So that's acidity, which sounds very complex now that you've made it.
Sorry,
But one way that I try to think about it is that tingle on your tongue when I'm tasting it, and maybe you can help validate this theory of mine or unvalidate it. When I'm looking for acid level in a wine, I'm usually thinking about pH when I'm tasting it. Is that true, or am I actually tasting the titratable acidity?
I think about the opposite.
Really?
Yeah, I think about TA.
Yeah, what's happening is the pH in your mouth is dropping as a result of the acid from the wine.
Okay.
So when you think something tastes tart or sour, it's because you have a low pH in your mouth. But that low pH is caused by all what we call the buffering capacity of the wine. So you could take a solution, and I haven't given this to the students yet, but you could take hydrochloric acid,
Don't do that.
add it to water, and just one tiny drop, and the pH would be right down to 0.
Whoa.
And you could put that in your mouth. You could. I haven't done this yet. I'm not recommending this.
Don't follow.
Don't do this.
And basically, you wouldn't taste anything at all.
Really?
Yeah, you might taste just a little hint of acidity, but your saliva would completely neutralize the acid.
Whoa.
And what makes wine tart is it has this buffering capacity. There's a lot of acid in the wine that keeps dropping the pH in your mouth, and that's why it tastes sour.
So that's why we get that tingling finish and that tart flavor on the palate.
Right.
When I was in my undergrad at Fresno State, and I was taking classes with Susan Rodriguez, who's retired now. She was doing sensory science with us. One of the things she said to me was basically, as far as the TA, The TA, you could have 6 grams per liter at different pHs, and those will the intensity will be different. So the higher TA that you have, you're going to feel an intensity, but the pH also kind of somewhat is a different scale, and it changes that intensity as well. So both of them are important in different ways.
Yeah.
So pH is going to help us preserve our wine,
Right.
and the total acidity is how much acid were in the grapes when we picked them. Is that right? Okay.
And that's really what drives the taste. Yeah.
Fantastic. So that's just one of the 4 things we're going to talk about. I'm going to kind of skip over sweetness because most wines that we taste are dry. But there is this thought about alcohol and what that does to wine. And wine can range anywhere from 5.5% alcohol at the super low level because it's got a lot of sweetness in it, and that's like a Moscato d'Asti, up to 20 if you've added some ABV, added some spirit, neutral grape spirit into the wine, like such as a port wine, or 21% alcohol by volume. So what is alcohol doing anything to the taste of the wine? How do we sense that on our palates? What else might it be doing in the wine? I'll leave it to both of you to answer this question if you want it.
I mean, basically alcohol has very mild taste sensation, right? I mean, there's a little bit of sweetness there, depends on, I don't really detect that myself. But when you get to higher alcohol levels, you actually get a change in the sensation in the mouth. And you might think of this as like if you sip some bourbon or vodka, you'll get a burning sensation. When you get up to those really high alcohols, you can get a little bit of that. And that's what, when I taste wine and it has a high alcohol, you can get a little bit of that burning sensation. Okay. But it doesn't have I don't think of alcohol as having a distinct, taste to it.
Okay.
Also, I mean, when you're doing some tasting or training with bourbon or scotch, we'll say, they tell you to put a certain amount of water into it. And if you add a little bit of water, then you add a little bit more, and each time you add more water, you can smell it. It definitely changes what the volatility of some of those aromas are. I mean, you can definitely smell some of the aromas differently as you add a little bit more water. And that's just has to do with the dilution of the amount of ethanol to the amount of water in the system.
Okay, so the alcohol can really affect what you're smelling in the wine.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Okay. And then, so we'll go from alcohol, we've got sweetness. Most wines are dry, although sometimes I describe wines as being bone dry. And it's not necessarily because they have no sugar in them. Yes, they have no sugar in them, or no residual grape sugars in them. But I'm actually maybe talking about the astringent quality, which leads us to our tannin, which we kind of discussed before. I don't know. Is there anything else we want to say about tannin? Is there an major interaction between any of these traits that we should know about before tasting the next wine?
Yeah, I mean, as far as tannin is concerned, both alcohol and acidity will change the perception of the tannin on your palate as well. So it's not just that you have tannin and you can feel that, but the wine as a whole, the acid, the alcohol, etc., it's gonna change how you feel that tannin and how it's gonna be perceived.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll do a little reveal. That was the wine that we just tasted. Quite a tasty, interesting example of Pinot Noir. It wasn't very noir at all. And let's grab our next glass and give that a look and a smell and a taste. Whoa. Taking a look at this wine is definitely a pale color. I can see through it. It doesn't look like it has very much color at all in it. And yeah, it looks to be a pale garnet color. I agree.
Don't you have a color card in your book?
I do have a color card. Let's pull it out. Handy color card. Where'd it go? It's gone.
I didn't take it.
Oh no. Well, I had one, but wait, maybe it's still here. All right, so handy dandy color card.
Hey, right there.
And I will hold up my thing. I actually agree with you. It's totally pale garnet.
Garnet right there.
Yeah, good call. Wow. So if you have a color card handy, these are in this little notebook that we make at Wine Folly, because they're handy. Okay, so that's the color of this wine. Let's give it a sniff. On the nose. We are pulling, what do you think this wine is? This is wine number 4. I smell.
Let's get the pull going there.
Yeah, let's get the pull going while we're sniffing this wine.
I got the you for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get cherries, spice. I get some cranberry character going on.
See, it smells sweeter to me than that. But I'm definitely in the red fruit realm. But I'm more like raspberries and strawberries. I get a little bit of dried orange. I get dried orange peel too. Like there's definitely like, no, bergamot is a good call. It's floral. And maybe even a little bit of allspice, which I associate with oak aging.
Yeah.
And brown sugar.
Another oak character. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right. So those are some smells for you. Let's give it a taste. It's much more tart on the palate. It's more like cranberries and cherries like you were describing, although it smelled very sweet to me. It kind of has a toasty, almost a toasty sweet finish too.
Oh, nice.
And the texture happens, like right when I get that burst of acid, I also feel that texture on my palate, but it's already gone.
Yeah, also in comparison to the Blanc de Noir, I mean, you definitely feel the astringency from the tannin in comparison.
Very much so. Okay, so we had our guesses in, none for Pinot Gris, and we're going to be closing in 5 seconds, at count of 5. So 5, 4, 3, get your guesses in, 2. I love that one person voted for Pinot Gris. I love you. And 1. They're like, oh, that's going to be the answer.
It's going to be Pinot
All
Gris.
right, shut it down. Oh, we tricked you, poor Pinot Gris. You get a silver star
Pinot
for
Gris.
it's
No, I'm
actually
kidding.
Pinot Noir. So these 2 wines actually, and we'll show you this wine on the slide. So that was definitely a Pinot Noir.
Yeah,
And if I can throw up our next slide here, we can show you what this is. It's by the same producer. So we wanted to show you this to show you 2 expressions of a wine that is usually known for making red wines, but however you can make a white wine with it. And they were night and day different from the same area, from everything like that. I guess.
I think some of our audience might be interested to know that you could make a white wine with almost any red grape, because almost all red grapes actually have white juice. So if you pick them and crush them and press them immediately, you can make a white wine. So you could make white Merlot, you could make white Zinfandel, which is obviously done quite a bit. You could make white Cabernet. Now, I'm not recommending it.
So why do you think Pinot Noir is the one that we all know that we can make all these different colors with? Is it just popularity, or is it the structure of the grape variety that makes it so?
Well, I think I guess I would have thought it's because it grows in Champagne, and they've traditionally for many years have made a white wine from a red grape. That's why it's called Blanc de Noir.
Yeah. So I want to see some more white Cabernet on the market, maybe. I'll give it a try, for sure. I'll taste it on our YouTube channel. So
all right.
That's cool. So you can make more white wines with red grapes if you're so inclined.
If you're so inclined.
If you're so inclined.
But I think some people would think you're basically throwing away half the quality, so why would they do that?
Why would you do that? Right. I see.
Also,
okay.
I mean, I think that it's pretty astonishing the aromatic difference between these. Not even talking about the textural difference, because one of them is definitely fermented on the. This isn't an orange wine. This is just a is pressed. It's white wine made from Pinot Noir, but the textural difference is known. But the aromatic difference is pretty astounding for just being both of them Pinot Noir, but one of them was fermented on the skins.
Great, awesome. So I think we are pretty much close to our last set, right?
Okay.
I think so.
And we have to do a dump here because we only have 4 glasses up here. So I'll throw us on the last slide. We're thinking Navarro Vineyards. They're in Mendocino, which is a fantastic, fascinating place to go check out vineyards in California because it's a little bit remote, you know? And so there's a lot of organic vineyards there, which I find to be really exciting.
They have their own language?
They have their own language, possibly.
Yeah, and I would like to thank Navarro for supporting the tasting.
Absolutely.
They always do a nice job, so appreciate that. And the winemaker actually came to UC Davis, so
Oh, wow.
call that out. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was surprised when I was looking up these wines, if you had checked on them, the prices were actually really good. And it's hard to find decent quality Pinot Noir.
Actually, the other part of the project that I did on the experimental wine, the Sauvignon Blanc that I was working with, was from Hush, which is also in Mendocino County.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, we have our last 2 wines in front of us now, and this is our last tasting, and this is our chance to really get into the edges. Like if all wine knowledge is a circle, we're at the very edge of the crust of the pie. The crispy crust. And so these last 2 wines, one of them is, I think they're both, you were saying this earlier, they're both experimental wines, but one is actually a commercial wine that you can buy. And so our challenge to you is, you can take notes on what these taste or smell like and all that sort of a thing, but the only thing you need to do right now is figure out which one is the commercial wine and which one is actually the 100% experimental wine. And I will leave it at that, and I'm going to open it up to anyone who wants to call out flavors, what they smell in these wines, because it's actually really hard. It's really, really hard to name flavors in these wines. Wow. I really want to swirl this first wine a lot because it's got a funkiness on the nose.
This is actually more Earl Grey Bergamot to me than the other one was earlier.
Oh, Earl Grey Bergamot.
Yeah.
Wine number 1, Earl Grey Bergamot. I like that call. Wow. I get a little grapefruit on that one.
Yeah. Earlier, and maybe I just need to have it in the glass longer. Because earlier I got some lychee or some tropical fruits as well. I know that you said grapefruit.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I would go with the well, citrus, grapefruit, yeah.
Throw up our poll. Everyone can taste both wines at this point. We don't have to individually taste them. Which one do you think is our experimental wine? Which one, is that the question? Yeah, which wine is the experimental wine? Wine number 1 or wine number 2?
See, wine number 1 is the
whitish looking wine.
Wine
A little
number
bit
2 is the
hazy.
reddish.
This wine number 2, you know what I think is it is really a deep color. It is deep red. It's not even, it's almost a deep garnet. It's a deep garnet color.
Yeah, it's definitely got.
I can't see through it. You know what's so interesting about it? It almost smells like, you were talking about aroma compounds, and a master sommelier once told me about impact compounds. These compounds that we look for in wines that can help us identify wines blind. And this one has what I think is an impact compound. It smells kind of like green peppercorn or bell pepper or that kind of a thing. And that aroma compound group, there's a group of compounds, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And those are the pyrazines.
Those are the pyrazines.
That have the bell pepper character.
And then you called it a smell earlier. And if anyone gets this, just congratulate yourself. Canned corn.
Yeah.
Is that actually a methoxypyrazine?
No, it's not. It's just dimethyl sulfide, right, Andy? And I actually I tend to get that more in. I mean, it's a flavor that for some reason I tend to be very sensitive to. And I tend to get it more in Syrah than I do in other varieties.
I get it a little bit in some really warm climate Chardonnay. Okay. I'll get a little canned corn note to it.
But I did notice that in this earlier.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you think is our experimental wine? God, this wine number 1 is so hard to identify flavors. It's funky. It almost smells like a cheese. Like, what kind of cheese is that? Morbier? I don't know. The cheese? The cheese with the ash layer in it? If you know that cheese, it's got a funky, cheesy note to it. All right, I'm going to give them both a taste.
And we should have given a choice of, cheese number 1 or cheese number 2.
That one on the palate is actually astringent. It's good, but it's very astringent. Wow.
Yeah,
so for a white wine. That one's got astringency too, but it's, it's balanced enough. It tastes like a red wine.
Yeah.
Tastes like a red wine. So, what is it? We're going to close the polls. Which one's the experimental wine? We'll be closing the poll in a count of 5. So it's 5, 4. Get your votes in. 3, 2,
Pinot Gris.
1. Shut it down. All right. Wow. We started with thinking that wine number 1 was the experimental wine, or the non-commercial wine, and then it sort of ended up with wine number 2 maybe taking the lead as the experimental wine. So which is it? This is your experiment.
Yeah, it's definitely the red wine here. So that's wine number 1.
Wine number 2. Wine number 2.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
so those who've guessed wine number 2, you are totally right. That is the experiment.
Absolutely.
What is going on? And this is kind of you guys' discussion. What's going on in that wine? What are we actually tasting?
So I guess the thought behind the experiment was we had some data from previous work, and there was also some previous work throughout the world looking at anthocyanins and their impact on tannin extractability. So we had already been doing some work, like I said, with Hush Vineyards in Mendocino County on a looking at it over time, but we also wanted to back that up with some wine experiments. So we partnered with Constellation Brands. We got some fruit in from the Lodi area, and we decided to do some ferments where we added red pigment to the ferments. We didn't change anything else about the fruit itself. We just fermented Sauvignon Blanc on the skins, and then 3 of the ferments we added no color to. 3 of the ferments we added about 1,000 parts per million of red pigment to, and we just looked at the results as far as tannin composition.
Yeah, so one problem we had in preparing these wines is that the Sauvignon Blanc skin fermented ones were kind of funky. Yeah. Well, no, let's say they were way too funky.
Yeah.
And so I reached out to Kenny at Hobo Wine and said, Kenny, please, can we have some skin fermented Chenin Blanc so our audience here can taste a reasonably decent skin fermented. So this is a white wine made like a red wine. In other words, you crush the fruit up, you put everything into the fermenter and you ferment. And because you do that, the wine ends up with tannin both from the skins and the seeds. And the question of the experiment then was, does that pigment really alter the resulting wine in terms of how much tannin you get out? And I think James had some really interesting data from that.
So definitely over the last 30 years, I think that Dr. Overholster, who was professor at the university, and then another professor at the university, Vern Singleton, who did a ton of work in the tannin field. I mean, I think that the data is pretty much in that anthocyanins are at least allowing for tannins to become more soluble in solution, and therefore, even if you make these wines in the same way, you'll end up with more tannin occurring in the one where you add pigment to, and therefore it will be more astringent, even though we have the feeling of astringency on the skin fermented Chenin Blanc that you have here in front of you.
Yeah. So how much more?
Well, when we did these side by side, which this white wine is not there, but on this graph, but when we added the pigment, the first 6 data points were during fermentation. The next was 6 months, and then the next one was 2.5 years, and we're looking at about a factor of 12, about 12 times. I will say that it started with pretty low tannin levels, so the non-color edition one had a pretty low tannin, but still the ones where we added pigment to, it increased the tannin by about 12 times. So it definitely is keeping it in solution.
So if you make a white wine like this one, using red wine making techniques, you don't really produce a red wine-like product with the same amount of tannin. It's much, much less than that.
Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely going to extract less tannin, and you're also going to keep less tannin in solution. And that was some of the work done by Singleton and Trousdale in '92, and also followed up by the experiment by Dr. Anita Oberholster in South Africa in 2009. Yeah.
So I've heard that some wine scientists are showing that wines that have more tannin are better, or of higher quality, sell for a higher price, right?
Well, there's actually your former pupil and my other former boss, Jim Kennedy, did a study on that in Adelaide, showing that there is some correlation between bottle price and the phenolic content. Yes, absolutely. Right. I do think that when it comes to tannin, though, there's a quality aspect there, and that has to do with. I think that's a very hard question to answer, though, because from a winemaking perspective, it's a stylistic decision. If you want to do a 60, and we were talking about this earlier, having to do with, for instance, Barolo, and in the 70s and early 80s when they were doing 6-month skin contact, and then.
So they're fermenting the wines for 6 months.
They're staying on the skins post fermentation for months on end, and you can do that, but the wines aren't drinkable for 15 or 20 years or whatever, So it becomes a stylistic decision. From my perspective, I want a wine to be able to age, but I also want it to be able to drink in a reasonable amount of time. But that's my opinion.
But how do you get there then?
I have my personal opinion, which there's some viewers who may disagree with me. I'd probably do a medium-length fermentation, in between 10 and 20 days. I'd limit my seed extraction basically for tannin, and I would, in the vineyard, I would try to maximize the amount of anthocyanins I had as possible.
Oh.
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier too.
So you're saying that the anthocyanin is how you want to express the tannin in the wine. You actually think the anthocyanin is the magic sauce.
Well, based on
which is the pigment.
Based on the wines that we have in front of us and the tannin figure in front of you, basically, if you're trying to maximize the amount of tannin that you're getting during a fermentation as far as skin tannin is concerned, then it's clear that you want to also maximize your anthocyanins. And one of the problems that we're dealing with, I did a shade cloth trial in 2016. Con Kuderall, who's another faculty member, did a shade cloth trial as well, and plenty of people are using things to mitigate climate change. But one of the problems that is occurring is that in a warm climate, if you have overexposure, you can end up degrading anthocyanins, and then.
So you mean in the vineyard?
In the vineyard, before you even get to the fermentation process, and that'll lead to a lower anthocyanin concentration in the wine, and therefore probably most likely lower tannins and lower quality.
Yeah.
Interesting. Right. So when we look at a wine and we see this really, really rich color, like in this Sauvignon Blanc.
Like in the Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah, yes. Like in this Sauvignon Blanc, can we assume that it probably will have high tannin?
Well, we have the data here.
Yeah. So yes. There's another. I don't know if you mind if I should or not cite so many studies, but there's another one where they actually used, and it was done in Australia, where they used a low tannin Syrah, but that fruit had a high anthocyanin concentration, and it was versus a high tannin Syrah fruit with a low anthocyanin concentration. And what they saw was that out of all the wines, as long as you had a high anthocyanin concentration, even the stuff that had a lower tannin concentration coming in, still ended up with a higher tannin concentration. So yes, The answer
The
is
the anthocyanin matters.
Yeah.
The anthocyanin is critical to tannin extraction.
It's absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And this is, when we were just talking about wine in general, you and I were, one of the things that we talked about was Nebbiolo, right? And so Nebbiolo is you have this pale variety. It's not super deep in color. It does have color, but it's not dark. And most people feel as though
it's super astringent.
It's one of the most tannic varieties.
Oh my God,
right?
my lips stick to my teeth when I taste. I like it, the feeling. I'm like, yeah, baby, it's happening.
Yeah,
but
it can feel very aggressive.
Yeah,
right?
it does.
And I gave a talk in 2017 showing that out of like 30 varieties, that it was one of the lowest as far as tannin concentration.
It's one of the lowest?
Yeah, so it's definitely not...
you heard it here first, folks.
So it's definitely not necessarily just tannin concentration. There's other things happening with tannin that make it feel very aggressive.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, so
right.
so tannin doesn't necessarily mean, having high tannin doesn't necessarily mean it will be super astringent on your palate either.
Yeah, that's what Andy and I have been working on for a little while, as well as Dr. Kennedy. Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have to move on directly to our questions.
Okay.
All right. So we were talking about doing an intermission, but I think we're just going to move straight into our questions.
Okay.
If we're all okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
So
Leave it on hobo for a little while.
yeah.
Thank you,
so let's look at some of the questions that have been coming in. So the one question was, which of these is the orange wine? Where does the orange versus red wine come in here?
Ooh. So our orange wine, I can answer this question because I know the answer, is actually this Hobo wine company. I'll go back to the slide where we have it, if I can. She's got to turn back. Oh, maybe we're going to go back a couple. Boom. This Chenin Blanc is actually an orange wine. So this cloudy, sort of medium, deep straw / medium gold colored wine is actually a skin fermented Chenin Blanc.
Right.
Which has got a lot going on. It's got astringency on the palate, and that's probably our one clue that we have in the wine, because it looks like a white wine. It is made with white grapes, that it's actually what we have been calling an orange wine. And
right.
I've heard that the orange color actually doesn't come from the pigment in the skins, it actually comes from the lignin in the seeds.
Well, I've also heard it comes from oxidation of that wine.
It comes from oxidation.
So you do the skin fermentation and you get, I would say, a darkly colored white wine, and then if you let that oxidize a little bit, it turns orange. And actually, in olden times, like way back, that's how most white wines were made in the old days, because that tannin, even though it's not that much, actually acts as a preservative.
Oh.
So if you had a really old technology that couldn't really keep oxygen out, the way we have stainless steel tanks and glass bottles, so if you were holding your wine for a year in an old oak tank, you're going to get some air in there. And that little bit of tannin caused by the preparation, the fermentation on the skins and seeds, would actually help protect the wine during that year. So it's still
It's interesting. It's interesting because it's a natural process, and it seems and it's an old school process, that, there's something there to that maybe it's even though we call it orange and it's this brand new thing, it's actually quite an old way of doing white wine.
Mm-hmm. Right, it's an old wine. Okay, James, now here's one for you. Can you describe the chemistry of tannin?
The chemistry of tannin. I guess the question is, that's tough. Andy, you're my mentor. Can you describe the chemistry of tannin?
Well, I guess the way to answer this would be to say, what are tannins from a chemical perspective, right?
And where do they occur as far as plants? Yeah.
Well, I would say tannins have, basically they have a couple properties that give them their couple chemical traits that give them their properties.
Absolutely.
Which is they're large molecules, and they have a lot of what we call hydrogen bonding sites and lipophilic sites. So they have the capacity to bind both polar and nonpolar centers, and this gives them the capacity to bind protein very tightly. So if we look at ancient uses of tannin, it's to convert animal hides into leather, which is a very primitive process. And it functions that way because it binds to proteins very tightly without even having to do a chemical reaction. So that's what the term tannin comes from, that capacity to do that process. I don't know, that's the best I can do in terms of, without getting into molecular structures and chicken wire and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I won't get into all that. I would also say that it's a ubiquitous compound across the plant kingdom. This is something that, we talked about it earlier. It's in chocolate, it's in tea, it's in persimmons.
If you like to lick large logs, pieces of wood.
But it's also in, it's in legumes as well. It's in forage. That it's actually important for cattle. The forages are. So I mean, it's really it's a plant defense compound, and we see it in wine as a quality aspect, but realistically, what it is it's a plant defense compound that the plants use to prevent other mammals from eating them.
Because we don't like it.
Yes. Exactly.
We don't like it.
And there's a theory out there that the reason why our saliva gets precipitated by tannin is it's an evolutionary battle. Basically, if we ate something really unripe like a persimmon, it's our body telling us, wow, that's unripe. We probably shouldn't be eating that, otherwise we're going to get an upset stomach.
Oh,
because it'll also precipitate dietary proteins.
Oh, interesting. I see.
Yeah.
So it's a warning signal.
Exactly.
In our mouths.
That's a theory. So I don't.
Yeah, we don't know. It's
at
the crust.
Evolutionary plant person telling me.
Yeah, they might. Yeah, they're gonna come on here and bust you.
Exactly.
So that's interesting. So one of the things that you've said that leaves us tasters asking all these questions, and I know you've got more, but we've talked about tannin being really high, but actually quite tasteable, like not taste that high, not be that astringent. Yeah. And then you talked about tannins being these long chains. Are there tannins with different lengths of chains, and does that change the way it tastes on your palate?
Now let's get into structure, Andy.
Yes, that's James' specialty, like tannin length versus astringency. There we go.
There.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's definitely been work over time, and there's exceptions too, because generally people say seed tannin is smaller tannins and sand tannin is larger tannins. There's an exception there, but in general, yeah, in young wines, the length of the tannin will increase the perception of dryness.
Okay, so longer means more dry.
Yes.
Okay.
In young wines. Yes.
In young wines.
Yeah. And anthocyanins, based on our work that we published, Andy, anthocyanins can help to decrease the size of tannins and therefore possibly enhance the softening of tannins.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that's very cool.
Okay, one last question. We're running out of time here, if we haven't already run over. What's the difference in tannins that you get from whole cluster versus crushed fruit or destemmed fruit?
Is this for me, Andy?
Yeah, that's for you.
Okay, well, based on what I know is that as far as stems are concerned, that's much more of a seed tannin as far as, okay, we're going to have to get a little bit more, more information.
Go that way.
So now we're getting into composition of tannins, and seed tannins tend to be what we call galliolated. So they have a gallic acid attached to this molecular structure that you were describing, Andy, but without getting into the chicken wire. Basically, stem tannin tends to be much more like seed tannin rather than skin tannin that is not like either one of them.
With the galliated part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay. So if you're doing a whole cluster fermentation, you can get even more of that tannin that's similar to a seed tannin into the wine. There's other things that come with doing a whole cluster, and that's aromatics. I think if you've ever had like Cristom Pinot Noir from Eola-Amity, I think that there's very good examples in Oregon of these 100% whole cluster wines that have a very unique aromatic profile. But as far as tannin's concerned, it's much more of like a seed tannin versus skin tannin spectrum.
All right. All right. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. We've, yeah, sorry.
It was fun. We were getting into tannin
this evening.
Yeah, that was really great.
I don't have that much saliva in my mouth. So
those last two, they're pretty astringent. I hope everyone had a grand old time diving into smells and tastes of wine. Now I'm deeply interested in tannin, I have to say, and I've always been afraid of getting into tannin because I've always thought of it as a negative thing, a negative trait of wine, and finding out that it's a positive and beneficial trait, not only for age-worthy, but for quality and for taste and for texture and for even price. Studied that it might actually be quite a good thing after all. So, do you have any last words, Andy?
Well, I want to thank the folks who supported us with the wines. Dwayne Cellars, Navarro, Hobo Wine, and of course, again, thank the folks at Full Circle Wine Solutions who provided the bottles, the Master of the World bottles of wine. It helped us so we didn't have to send full bottles all around the country. Great, and we hope we'll be able to work with them again in the future. On your way out, please fill out the survey, the feedback survey. This program's been recorded, and in about a week or so, we'll have it posted on our website, the RMI website, as well as on our YouTube channel. If you want to learn about our future programs, please join our newsletter, visit our website, etc., and where you'll learn about our upcoming events. And as far as tonight, that's it. So thank you all for checking out our tasting on wine tannin, and good night.